The Young and the Restless spoilers. Sienna's name had only begun to echo through Genoa City a few days earlier, yet it was enough to stir an entire community of whispers, curiosity, and irritation. To most, she appeared as a sudden insertion into lives already overflowing with chaos, as if the writers of fate had forced her into a story that did not belong to her. But behind the mask of coincidence and the fragile facade of innocence, there was something much darker pulsing beneath the surface. Sienna was not a misplaced stranger, nor a woman looking for belonging. She was the quiet storm that had been circling the Newman family for far longer than anyone suspected. Her arrival was not accidental. It was the careful unfolding of a plan that had been set in motion years ago, a plan constructed from bitterness, loss, and the kind of hatred that only grows from betrayal. The night Noah Newman's car skidded off the wet road, twisting into steel and smoke, was not the random misfortune it had seemed. That night was a prelude to something larger, an invisible hand tightening its grip on every life it touched. Noah, trapped between consciousness and the void, was the only one who knew what truly happened, but his silence, induced by the coma that held him hostage, was the perfect shield for Sienna to operate beneath. While the doctors fought to save him, she quietly blended into Genoa's rhythm, her presence subtle enough to be tolerated yet strong enough to command attention. People noticed her beauty first, then her mystery, and finally, her contradictions, how she seemed fragile yet fearless, sympathetic yet secretive. Nick Newman had always trusted his instincts. In business, in family, and in matters of the heart, he could sense when something was off. And Sienna, from the moment she appeared, radiated a wrongness he could not shake. It wasn't jealousy or paranoia, it was an instinctive warning that hummed in his blood. He began to observe her discreetly. How she maneuvered through social gatherings, how she spoke to certain people with too much knowledge, how her eyes flickered at the mention of the Newman name. There was a precision to her charm, a rehearsed rhythm in her interactions, and it terrified him. He saw the way she gravitated toward those close to his family, how she listened more than she spoke, how she smiled with calculated softness. Each move seemed designed to insert her deeper into their orbit. Still, Nick had no proof. To accuse her of manipulation or deceit without evidence would make him appear paranoid, especially in a town where every person carried secrets of their own. But Sienna, perhaps too confident in her constructed persona, began to slip. The mask she had worn so perfectly began to crack when she underestimated how closely Nick was watching. He noticed small inconsistencies, the way she claimed to have no family yet seemed to know the history of the Newman Enterprises feud better than most reporters, the way she feigned ignorance about Noah's accident but avoided eye contact whenever the topic arose, the way she panicked when Victor's name appeared in casual conversation. It was in one of these moments of subtle panic that Nick realized she wasn't just another opportunist trying to latch onto their fortune or fame. She had history, deep and personal. He followed her quietly, collecting fragments of her life that she had tried to bury. Records, aliases, photographs that didn't match her current identity, all leading to a chilling revelation. Sienna was the daughter of a woman who had once lost everything because of Victor Newman's ruthless business decisions decades earlier. Her mother had died broken and destitute, and Sienna had inherited not only her grief but her desire for revenge. Her years abroad were not the wandering of a lost soul but the strategic preparation of a woman determined to dismantle the Newman empire from within. The closer Nick got to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. Sienna's calm exterior began to fracture as her carefully woven web trembled under the weight of exposure. She realized someone was onto her, though she didn't yet know who. The air between them changed, every glance became a confrontation, every word a test of nerves. Nick started to piece together the final connection between her and Noah's accident, and it chilled him. The crash was not random, it was a setup designed to send a warning, not to kill but to inflict pain. Sienna had wanted the Newmans to fear loss the way her family once did. But something went wrong. The rain, the timing, the panic, it all spiraled out of her control, leaving Noah at death's door and her conscience dangling between vengeance and guilt. She hadn't planned to become a murderer, but the accident bound her fate to theirs irrevocably. From that moment, every step she took deeper into Genoa City was an attempt to justify the unforgivable, to convince herself that her mother's spirit demanded justice at any cost. Nick's discovery came not from a confession but from a slip of carelessness. A torn envelope, an old photograph, and a letter addressed to a woman long dead, all hidden in Sienna's desk at the Newman Tower office she had managed to infiltrate under a false name. The handwriting matched one of Victor's former secretaries, a woman fired after the collapse of a small biotech firm the Newmans had absorbed 20 years ago. That firm had belonged to Sienna's mother. The revelation left Nick frozen, not only in shock but in something deeper, the recognition that his family's legacy of power and conquest had created their own enemies. For every triumph Victor celebrated, there were those who had lost everything. Sienna was the living embodiment of the collateral damage their empire had caused. Nick's anger turned inward, laced with guilt and helplessness. How could he confront her without acknowledging the sins that gave birth to her hatred? How could he protect his family when they themselves were the reason for her vendetta? Meanwhile, in the sterile silence of the hospital, Noah stirred. His eyelids fluttered against the blinding light, fragments of memory piercing through the fog, headlights in the rain, a woman's voice, the taste of metal and fear. As he began to recall the events of that night, the puzzle started to complete itself in his mind. He remembered the road, the curve, the sudden flash of another car's lights, and the scream he never heard again. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. But before he could share his revelation, his body betrayed him, collapsing back into unconsciousness. That temporary lapse gave Sienna the advantage she needed. She sensed that her window of safety was closing, yet something inside her hesitated. Perhaps it was the memory of Noah's kindness before the crash, or the dawning realization that revenge had consumed more of her soul than it had avenged her mother's pain. Still, she couldn't stop. Not when she was so close to destroying the family she believed responsible for everything she'd lost. Nick confronted the truth quietly. He didn't expose her immediately, instead, he watched, waiting for her next move, trying to anticipate how far she would go. But Sienna was already one step ahead, setting traps that would make the Newmans question each other. Anonymous leaks, falsified financial reports, and subtle manipulations began to surface. Her plan wasn't to kill or steal, it was to divide. She understood that destroying a dynasty didn't require violence, it required mistrust. And the Newmans, with their egos and secrets, were fertile ground for suspicion. As the walls closed in, Nick knew that revealing Sienna's identity publicly would trigger chaos, yet staying silent risked everything. His mind became a battlefield of moral choices, and he found himself questioning not only Sienna's motives but his own family's worthiness of protection. Was he truly defending justice, or just trying to preserve the illusion of Newman integrity? When the confrontation finally arrived, it was not loud or explosive but eerily quiet. Sienna stood in the office that once belonged to Victor, staring at the skyline, her reflection merging with the glass, a ghost haunting the empire that destroyed her bloodline. Nick entered, his expression carrying both fury and sorrow. The silence between them said everything. He now knew who she was, and she knew that he knew. The balance of power shifted not through words but through understanding. Sienna's secret was out, yet she didn't flee. Instead, she looked at him with the weary calm of someone who had already accepted her fate. For the first time, Nick saw her not as an enemy but as a mirror, showing him the cost of his family's success, the price of decades of unchecked ambition. Still, knowing her pain did not erase the danger she posed. Her plan had already set things in motion that could not easily be undone. As Genoa City continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware of the storm brewing beneath, Nick faced the unbearable truth that Sienna's exposure might not save anyone. It could destroy them all. The Newman name had always attracted enemies, but this time the threat was not from an outsider seeking wealth or revenge. It was from a woman who had lived among them, who understood their weaknesses, and who could dismantle their world from the inside out. Noah's recovery would change everything once he awakened and named her, yet the damage had already begun. Sienna's story was no longer about vengeance, It had become a tragic reminder that every powerful family leaves ghosts in its shadow. And as Nick watched her walk away into the night, unsure whether to stop her or let her vanish, he couldn't help but wonder if this was truly the end of her war, or merely the calm before a greater reckoning. Because in Genoa City, revenge never dies. It just changes its face. The name Jordan had long been a ghost in the shadows of Genoa City, whispered in rumors but rarely spoken aloud since the chaos that followed her disappearance. When Sienna's presence began to shake the Newman family to its core, the question that haunted everyone was not only who she truly was but whose blood she carried. The possibility that Sienna might be Jordan's daughter, conceived in the ashes of deceit and revenge, was enough to make even Victor's oldest enemies shudder. The more Nick uncovered, the more the pieces aligned in unnerving ways. The dates, the locations, the trail of money transfers tied to Jordan's hidden accounts, it all led back to one conclusion too dark to dismiss. Sienna was not just another outsider with a grudge, she was the living legacy of one of the most dangerous women ever to walk into the Newman orbit. If Jordan had truly orchestrated her own death years ago, perhaps she had left behind something more enduring than a name, a child trained to avenge her downfall. And if that child was now standing in Genoa City under a false identity, then Sienna's revenge was not just personal, it was generational. Claire, who had grown close to the Newmans in recent months, seemed to know more than she dared admit. Her silence around Sienna was deafening, her eyes often betraying unease whenever Sienna's name came up. She had once mentioned meeting a woman overseas who spoke of unfinished business with the Newmans, and now Nick wondered if that woman had been Sienna herself. The tension between the two women was subtle but undeniable, a glance exchanged at the wrong time, a shared look that carried too much weight. When Nick pressed Claire, she deflected, claiming she knew little about Sienna's past. But deep down, he could feel the lie. Claire's loyalty was conflicted, perhaps even compromised. There was a secret agreement, a pact sealed in fear or guilt, that kept her from revealing what she knew. Maybe she owed Sienna something. Maybe Sienna held a truth that could destroy Claire too. Whatever bound them, it was powerful enough to silence her even as chaos brewed around them. Nick's patience finally snapped one evening at the Newman ranch. Sienna had arrived unannounced, as she often did lately, her tone casual but her presence suffocating. Nick had reached the end of reason. The evidence, the lies, the feeling of being watched, it all crashed together in one impulsive surge of fury. He grabbed her by the arm, his voice sharp, demanding answers, demanding a name that made sense. Who was she really? Why had she come here? But Sienna refused to answer, her lips trembling between fear and defiance. He shouted again, the frustration of months boiling over, his hand clutching the collar of her coat as he pulled her closer. Her perfume mixed with the faint scent of rain and deception. She screamed, not out of fear but as a calculated move to regain control, her voice slicing through the silence of the room. The sound echoed down the hallways like a warning. "Say your name." Nick growled, his voice cracking with the desperation of a man who needed to make sense of his world before it collapsed. And then she broke. Not into confession, but into rage. Her eyes burned with something primal, and her voice erupted in a scream that carried both fury and triumph. "Don't touch me," she shouted, shoving him back with surprising force. Her eyes were wild now, not the calm manipulator he had observed for weeks but a cornered animal ready to strike. "You think you know me? You have no idea who I am or what I've lost because of you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, her voice trembling with emotion too raw to fake. It was then that Nick saw the crack in her armor. She was not just pretending to be hurt, she was hurt, by something older and deeper than their confrontation. It was in that moment he realized that everything she had done, the infiltration, the manipulation, even the accident, was not born solely of malice but of grief transformed into vengeance. Yet before he could press further, she lashed out again. "Touch me one more time and I'll call the police," she hissed, fumbling for her phone, her hands shaking but her gaze unwavering. The threat was not idle, she meant it. She would turn the entire town against him if she had to. Nick froze. The thought of headlines, of scandal, of his family dragged through the mud again, it was enough to make him hesitate. But Sienna took his hesitation as weakness. "You're just like him," she spat, voice cracking under the weight of suppressed tears. "Just like your father, always taking what doesn't belong to you, always thinking you can control people's lives." Her words cut through him like knives, and for a fleeting second, he saw the shadow of Victor in his own reflection. Maybe she was right. Maybe the sins of the father had found their way into his blood after all. Sienna's breathing was ragged, her body trembling with adrenaline. "I will destroy you," she whispered, her tone soft but deadly. "You and everything your family built." And in that threat, Nick heard not madness but purpose. Whatever she was planning, it was not over. It was just beginning. That was when Sharon appeared, her timing both a miracle and a curse. She had come by to return something Nick had left at the coffee house but instead walked into a storm. Her voice, calm but firm, cut through the chaos as she stepped between them, her eyes darting from Nick's clenched fists to Sienna's tear-streaked face. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was electric, heavy with accusation and disbelief. Sharon placed a hand on Nick's chest, pushing him gently but decisively backward. "Stop," she said quietly, though the force in her tone left no room for argument. Nick's jaw tightened, his breath uneven, his mind still spinning from the confrontation. Sienna stood behind her like a wounded predator, trembling but still dangerous. "She's not who you think," he muttered, his voice low and trembling with both anger and warning. Sharon didn't reply immediately, she just looked at Sienna, studying her, sensing the same darkness that Nick had felt. But Sharon was not one to act without understanding. She believed in redemption, in the possibility that even the most broken soul could find light again. That was her weakness and her strength. Sienna, seizing the moment, straightened her coat, wiped her face, and stared at Nick with eyes full of fury and contempt. "This isn't over," she said, her tone low, almost trembling with suppressed rage. "You'll regret this." She turned toward Sharon, her voice softening into something almost pleading. "You of all people should know what it's like to be misunderstood." And with that, she walked out, her heels clicking like the ticking of a bomb set to explode. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving an echo that lingered long after she was gone. Nick stood frozen, his mind a battlefield of emotions, rage, guilt, confusion, and something he couldn't yet name. Sharon exhaled slowly, sensing that what had just unfolded was only the surface of something much deeper. She turned to Nick, her voice quiet but urgent. "What did you do?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. But Nick didn't respond. He was staring at the door, his thoughts spiraling toward the growing realization that Sienna wasn't merely an adversary, she was a reflection of everything his family had tried to bury. If she truly was Jordan's daughter, then the past had come back in the most painful way imaginable. The sins of Genoa City's elite were never washed away, they simply resurfaced in new forms, wearing new faces. As the night deepened and thunder rolled in the distance, Nick knew that Sienna's promise of revenge wasn't an empty threat. She had the intelligence, the resources, and the emotional drive to dismantle everything the Newmans held dear. And now, with Claire's silence shielding her and Sharon unknowingly caught in the middle, Sienna had more power than ever. Yet beneath all the fury, beneath the desire for vengeance, there was something else growing inside her: doubt. That confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Nick's words had struck too close to truths she had spent years trying to ignore. Was she really fighting for her mother's justice, or had she become the very monster she once despised? Her mother had taught her that revenge would heal the pain, but all Sienna felt now was emptiness and exhaustion. Still, she couldn't stop. Not yet. The damage was already done, and turning back would mean admitting defeat. She walked through the streets of Genoa City as rain began to fall, the water washing away the traces of her tears but not her resolve. Somewhere behind her, the lights of the Newman Ranch glowed faintly through the storm, a reminder that the war between her blood and theirs was far from over. Nick, pacing the dimly lit living room, knew that this was no longer just about protecting his family, it was about uncovering a truth that stretched far beyond the accident, beyond Sienna's lies, even beyond Jordan's legacy. There were layers upon layers of deceit, and he feared that by pulling at one thread, he might unravel everything. Sharon, ever the empath, tried to calm him, but he couldn't rest. He knew Sienna would strike again, and next time, she wouldn't just come for him, she would go after everyone he loved. And if she truly carried Jordan's blood, then revenge was not only her mission but her inheritance. Outside, as lightning split the sky, Sienna paused at the edge of town, her reflection flickering in a rain-soaked window. For a brief moment, she imagined her mother's face there, faint but smiling, as if proud of what she had set in motion. And though a part of Sienna longed for peace, the other, the part forged from loss and fire, whispered that peace was for those who hadn't been broken. The war was just beginning.